Upon retrospect, it's really surprising that Steve and Natasha never got together, because the easiest trick would be to have Steve fall in love with Nat to symbolically show how he falls in love with the present.
And sometimes the best that we can do is to start over.
And for Nat to signify that she is a new person, intrinsically connected to someone tied to the present and not the past. But the decision not to go down this route ends up highlighting that their relationship is a bit more continuous, because instead of representing a destination for each other, now they've turned into checkpoints for the other's identity. As Jenkins defined, identification matters because it is the basic cognitive mechanism that humans use to sort out themselves and their fellows, individually and collectively. For both Steve and Natasha, this comes from their constant negotiation between the meaning offered from the uniform and the values from their personal ideals. So I want to establish that this isn't a comparison essay like the Captain America and Iron Man series I did. This is more concentrated on the relationship itself, because after the Avengers, Steve and Nat effectively became inseparable.
I've seen her flirt. Up close.
So it's less of a thematic ping-pong game and more of a direct intersection, if that makes any sense.
You still uncomfortable?
It's not exactly the word I would use.
To hit you in the head with a peanut butter sandwich.
Steve and Nat's introduction both involves them being under disguise in hopes to be at service to the establishment, but their motivations are radically different. Steve is trying to serve, but ultimately he's expressing his personal values.
Bucky, come on, there are men laying down their lives. I got no right to do any less than them.
His sense of identity is not dependent on what the establishment can offer him, it's more about a private moral pursuit. While Natasha is just doing a job, she's not expressing anything particularly meaningful in her mask as Natalie Rushman. Instead, her sense of value is all rooted in her performance.
Where are you from?
Legal?
Therefore, immediately there's a contrast between how they act as authors in their own lives. Steve is at peace living as an outsider, while Natasha is dependent on identifying herself as an insider.
I need your impression.
You have quiet reserve. I don't know, you have an old soul.
I meant your fingerprint.
So there are characters that are looking at the same identity but at two different angles. As a result, the ma'am scene,
Agent Romanoff? It's Captain Rogers.
Ma'am?
Hi.
where they finally meet one another, is equivalent to them encountering an alternate reality, if you will. Each character is representative of an alternate viewpoint in the same life.
These guys come from legend, they're basically gods.
There's only one god, ma'am. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that.
Not necessarily opposing ones, but just different. And this sincere connection is due to the fact that they're both equally charmed by one another. So their relationship is built on an unconscious negotiation, where what is more similar between them overshadows what is different. This is emphasized when they're the only characters fighting on the ground in the climax. The soldier and the spy are both servants to the flag, and are more importantly characters that are striving upwards in a world populated by those who can fly. And that's what makes them special. Their capacity to relate themselves to higher forms of possibilities is what allows them to express themselves and become more. This shared experience and shared sense of identity is, as a result, what makes them the ones who close the portal.
Close it.
They are the most instrumental figures in the Battle of New York precisely because they can't fly. Subsequently, the first phase of Steve and Natasha's relationship is all about establishing that these characters are very much determined by their professional identities. The job is what gives them meaning. But this relationship with the costume and the mask operates in very much two different forms. Captain America, in quotation marks, as an identity is valuable for Steve because it allows him to project himself into it.
But you're keeping the outfit, right? You know what? It's kind of growing on me.
Even the origins of the shield comes from his personality, while in contrast Black Widow, in quotation marks, is an identity that is dependent on Natasha allowing the profession to project something onto her.
I want you to meet Agent Romanoff.
Hi.
I'm a SHIELD shadow. Once we knew you were ill, I was tasked to you by Director Fury.
I suggest you apologize.
Therefore, who holds power over them comes from who holds the standards and principles of this relationship between them and the job. So entering into Winter Soldier, this is deconstructed because the value of the flag is thrown into question. SHIELD was Hydra the whole time. If the signified is now signifying something different, then where do we go to find meaning?
When I first joined SHIELD, I thought I was going straight. But I guess I just traded in the KGB for Hydra.
And the relationship between Steve and Nat at the heart of the story is all about meaning making effectively. One of the clear reasons to why Steve and Nat aren't connected romantically in this film is that it allows the story to maintain a gap between them. They don't depend on each other, they influence each other.
You know, it's kind of hard to trust someone when you don't know who that someone really is.
Yeah.
Natasha is constantly trying to set up dates with Steve so he's less lonely all the time.
You know, if you ask Kristen out from statistics, she'd probably say yes.
While Steve is implicitly influencing her to become more honest. So their relationship is a microcosm of what the film envisions as the answer to an ambiguous world. Specifically, big ideologies and political narratives like SHIELD and Hydra are inadequate in answering the big questions of individual identity, because the real answers come from small answers that we cultivate from experiences with people. It's reality over rhetoric. And this is what Steve and Natasha teach each other.
SHIELD, Hydra. It all goes.
Nat shows Steve a world where he's relevant because he can mentor it in terms of trust and in terms of honesty, while Steve gives Natasha much needed affirmation.
And it was down to me to save your life, and you be honest with me. Would you trust me to do it?
I would now.
Subsequently entering into Age of Ultron, both characters' grips with these smaller but more robust answers is now tested. Steve sees an impossible past which damages his connection with the present, while Natasha experiences an impossible present with her relationship with Bruce, which damages her relationship with the future. Both characters are denied their deepest desires and all they have left is their relationship with the job. But the compromise is that they're now in control of what that job is. And this is symbolized by Steve pulling her out of her moment of sadness with work.
Want to keep staring at the wall, or do you want to go to work? I mean, it's a pretty interesting wall.
Thought you and Tony were still gazing into each other's eyes.
They become the leaders of the Avengers. They build their own flag in a way, and use their smaller answers that they discovered through their relationship to build something big. Without sounding too poetic. But what happens when you take away this new flag too? The Sokovian Accords represent something different for both characters. It represents fear overpowering the values of the culture of trust which Steve identified with.
If someone dies on your watch, you don't give up.
Who said we're giving up?
We are for not taking responsibility for our actions.
While for Natasha it's an opportunity to sustain the Avengers.
Staying together is more important than how we stay together.
So both characters have vastly different senses of continuity. For Natasha, the Avengers is the context that has to be preserved, while for Steve, morality and personal responsibility is what has to be. Therefore, their original differing forms of identification is still very much present.
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
For Steve, it was never the flag, it was his beliefs. While Natasha, it was never about herself, it was all about the profession, which is what makes the funeral hug so crucial for the both of them. This is not a moment with Captain America and Black Widow, this is a moment with Steve and Natasha. Their social identity is determined not by the flag or the Avengers, but by each other. The smaller answers they discovered was the relationship itself, which is why Nat picks Steve over Tony. This relationship is more official in her mind in solidifying her sense of moral identity than any other signed piece of paper will, or can.
Are you incapable of letting go of your ego for one goddamn second?
Therefore, social identity in Phase 2 is all about change. Nat and Steve's relationship is on shifting sands because what their professions offered them keeps changing. One moment working for S.H.I.E.L.D. was about moral certainty, then it turned out to be about manipulation. Then leading the Avengers was about personal empowerment and control, but then it becomes a point of disempowerment and tension. Both characters have no sense of external continuity, but what they do have is each other. Their relationship is an internal continuity, if you will, something that's always reliable. So entering into Infinity War, Steve and Nat are the only reliable forces for other characters, which makes for a cool introduction, but it's also symbolic of their worth in this universe. Their willingness to depend on each other, thick or thin, makes them the most reliable figures for everyone else. They're there to save Vision and Wanda. They get the job done even when the official leaders don't, and they are the ones who lead the charge against Thanos' army and become the last defense for the Mind Stone. This is both characters at the peak of their strength. Even without their costumes or the Avengers emblem, the job doesn't define them because they don't need it anymore. They have built themselves as something as equally mighty. But they still ultimately fail, so the lesson they learned in Winter Soldier and Civil War is now put into question, as the context that had given them answers in life has been stripped away.
Oh God.
Entering into Endgame, the two ingredients of their entire relationship is kinda nicely highlighted: the smile and the tear, which is shared at the beginning when the Avengers are practically disbanded and Natasha and Steve are the only ones left.
You here to do your laundry?
And to see a friend.
What happens when nobody needs to depend on dependable people?
I used to have nothing. And then I got this job.
The line that Nat has about the job giving her everything wasn't just referencing her time fighting aliens or robots, it's also referencing the time she hugged Steve at his moment of weakness, when she hung out at a party and spent her moments watching her friend's baby on the phone. Nat's professional relationships were the only relationships she had. Without them, she's alone, which gives extra context to why she kept trying to set up dates with Steve and Winter Soldier. The fear of being alone is an anxiety embedded in her very core being, but the relationship with Steve is still there. In fact, it's the only one that has remained. Because Steve is okay with being alone, and that's how he's always felt even before the super soldier serum.
But I can get by on my own.
Natasha sheds a tear and Steve is there to give her a smile. Their relationship is an entanglement of logics, where different people are willing to share an identity. This is then reflected by their farewells when Nat says goodbye to Steve and she smiles.
See you in a minute.
And when she doesn't come back, Steve then has a tear. For the first time, they've switched roles. Nat embraced dying alone, while Steve feels truly and utterly alone for the first time. Even more alone than when he lost Bucky for the second time. On one hand, it would have been great if we had a more conclusive final Steve and Natasha scene, but on the other hand, this exchange is a wonderful summary for their entire relationship. The smile is a structure, and the tear is life without it. And this is what their friendship always was, a smile and a tear, a walk and then a hug. They influenced each other by allowing the other to be a reference point for themselves.
This is gonna work, Steve.
I know it will.
Identity can only go as far as what ideals are brought into being, and Captain America and Black Widow surrounded each other with ambition and yet safety.